everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel, where today we are not going to be doing writing sprints for once, and instead we are going to talk about a book. I'm so excited.
Oh my gosh, I am so flippin' excited to talk about this book. Like, oh my gosh. So I finished it on Sunday, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It was because I know I had texted you one day, and it was something about, oh my gosh, like, this is wild, this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the next day I finished it, and I was like, I really want to text her, but I know she said that she's not done, and I was like, I don't want her to be like, oh crap.
Yeah, no, I was really pushing the limit with my reading just because I've just had so much going on. Right. But I finished it. Yay. Woo! So if you are just tuning in, this is going to be about an hour long, just kind of discussion. So obviously we read up in here, The Passage by Justin Cronin. So The Passage was written and published in 2010. So it's 11 years old at this point. It is it's kind of following several different characters. Essentially, the main book starts in 2012 when a viral outbreak kind of creates these vampiric-like creatures. And they were once humans, and their DNA gets spliced together because they're going under tests, and it ends up kind of making a vampiric apocalypse rather than a zombie apocalypse. So then you're following the book for about 100 years. So you're seeing like how we get to the like D-Day type of thing, like the day zero, and then all the repercussions, like following characters about 100 years later and how they are surviving and dealing with it and what the creatures have become in 100 years. So this book is essentially about vampires without being vampires. It's the most interesting thing.
Yeah, it's very... First of all, I just need to say it was beautifully written. Mm-hmm. Like, it was flawless. And I only listened to the audiobook, which I thought was fantastic. I feel like the guy who was actually narrating it did very, very well. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll just start from like the beginning because
let's do like a quick, like non-spoilerly, like just kind of like general gist, like what rating, if you want to give it a rating, what rating would you give it, and like what are some general thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like out of 5 stars, I would probably give it like a 4.8. The 0.2 kind of being like nothing is perfect, but it is so beautifully written, like it deserves 5 stars. But so I loved how like twisty and turny it was, where I kind of thought like, oh, like something might happen, but then like it was an unexpected of what would happen next. But it wasn't, it made sense with the things that would happen in the story. Trying to just think about how my general thoughts, because I'm just like, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought getting into like seeing how it started and then seeing how people were affected, I really like that, because we're so used to like how it happens afterwards and nothing is ever really explained as to how it happens. So that's what I really, really enjoyed about it too. What about you?
So I think I would give it a 4.5. So I would say the biggest issue I had, and it's not really an issue, but it's just, it meanders a lot. But like at the same time, the meandering made sense. Like there was never a dull moment personally for me, which is why like I think I did enjoy it. It is such a long book though, so sometimes I just feel like, was all of it quite necessary from time to time, just because it's such a long book, and then you think about it, it's a trilogy and they're all the same length. So like when I was reading through it, I just kept thinking like, how in God's name is this going to be 3 more books? I kind of got the answer at the end of this book, which we'll get to later. But but I was kind of like, there's some things would happen and I'm like, why do we need to know about this? But then like it would tie together later. So yeah, I will definitely say, as much as sometimes I felt like it could have been meandering, he did such a good job at like making sure like no detail was spared. Like everything kind of had a plot and a reason for doing it. And then it all came together at the end and like it went well. So overall, I did, like you said, I think the writing was very good. for the fact that this was almost a 40-hour audiobook
I know.
and it's 800 some pages as a gigantic book, it certainly kept my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I think you were really good too with saying, like, I do feel like we would kind of almost go down a rabbit hole, but then like we would come back out. That's a good point too.
Mm-hmm.
Like we would kind of meander, and then I didn't think about that, but I kind of felt like that too, where sometimes, especially with the audiobook, where sometimes I would get confused, but I was also doing other things where I couldn't figure out for a brief moment, be like, oh, is this kind of like a little flashback, or is this actually happening? But that could be because I was listening to the audiobook and doing other things, so I could have like maybe missed something. Yeah. But yeah, I think he did it just enough. But if he had done any more, it would have been been an overkill.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's just funny too, because like I look at this book that's gigantic, and back in January, I read Lore by Alexander Bracken.
Yeah.
And that was only a 500-page book. And my Lord, I was like, this is all meandering. Like nothing was working.
Yeah.
So like, it's just kind of I haven't read anything else by Alexander Bracken, so I'm not like trying to diss her or any means, but it's just so crazy how like some people can write a shorter book and it feel like nothing's really happening, nothing makes sense, and then you can make this monstrosity of a book.
Yes.
And now if I remember correctly, I remember something that like some of these were stories that like he would tell his children as like a bedtime story.
Yeah.
So like it's just kind of like so crazy to me, like how did you go from that concept and like what I want to know like what the bedtime stories were, because like
I know
first stuff was scary, and then like how did you do an 800-page novel that like has so much depth to it? So it's kind of incredible to his talent.
Absolutely. And like I just feel like he world builded the crap out of this. Like it was just like a single idea, like, oh, you know, an apocalypse. Well, what about with vampires? Well, how about the start of it all? And then we jump 100 years into the future, kind of dabble backwards a little bit, but then we push forward. And and I know we talked about this in text messages, but I did like how he would include like the snippets of like the journal entries from Auntie and Sarah. And then I think at the beginning, because I'm not really a big fan of like emails, and I know like that was like the first, I think the second chapter.
Yeah, there's a couple.
Yeah, so it was kind of hard to follow with the audiobook at first, but I was just trying to like get the gist of it, and I understood it enough to where like, oh, okay, well this makes sense. This is where it's coming from. Yeah. But he literally had a little bit of everything in it, like foreshadowing, emails, smoke signals. Now, like,
maybe.
You know, maybe we missed something.
Yeah. All right. So I feel like if anyone's watching at this point, like we will start getting into some of the spoiler content. So obviously if you've read this or you have no plans on reading it and you just want to hear our thoughts, stick around now.
Right.
So let's talk about the beginning of the book. So the beginning of the book was really heavily focused on the like start of the virus, like how all of these pieces were coming together, how all the main characters of the book were starting to like become the catalyst for the apocalypse.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And so I really, at first, like, because it followed Amy for a while, like we just kind of understood like where she came from. So I did find it really cool. Like we got backstory on her mom, and then how, you know, they were practically homeless, and then how she ended up being one of the test subjects. And I really like how you also got Walgast, and then I forgot his partner's name, Doyle.
Yep.
And I liked them, and I thought that they were a good contrast with each other. And then when, you know, Amy was finally taken, and Lacey was one of my favorites from the beginning. I really, really enjoyed Lacey. She was very sweet, and I feel like she just brought a sense of hope to like the story, even from the beginning, because like she was almost like Amy's hope, like in this dark world for her. Lacey was like her savior.
Yeah.
And
Well,
she
yeah,
was,
because I think Amy, like being like a 6-year-old at the time,
I
like
know.
it reminds me of like a lot of my clients, like who have like just had so much trauma and like adversary, but like became resilient anyway. And almost like this like wisdom beyond her years, because I think like she like at one point like, she kind of said like she also knew her mom wasn't going to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like you definitely can just tell that like she was like the perfect candidate
She
for.
was. And I mean, that poor girl, like,
Mhm,
she, I just wish like I could hug her because she was so
mhm.
sweet and she was so cute. And she just went from like when she was born to like the whole rest of the story. It was just
Mhm. Yeah, it was
not
a very
ideal.
good arc on her part.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and I did like obviously I kind of figured like there was some type of military testing, like they had talked about it. And so when she was finally in there and they had injected her, I thought it was cool like how you saw her change, but then
Mhm.
also you got snippets of like how the other characters were affected to like the other
Yeah.
test subjects. Like I thought it was pretty cool, like they were hanging, like,
Mhm.
and their telepathic ability. And I figured like when who was it? I think it was Babcock with
Babcock's like
Gray.
the main like
Yeah.
pretty much like the counterpart to Amy. So like
Yes.
obviously just like to kind of keep in line with like what we're talking about. Obviously later in the book, like so Amy is like one of like the main like test subjects that end up having like a reaction that essentially just makes her telepathic, but also slows down her aging. Whereas Babcock is kind of like the antagonist, and he's like the bad vampire of this group.
Oh yeah.
And I do think they juxtapose them. And it's so interesting because later in the book, when they have like kind of like their like literal stare down, it's
Yeah.
just so interesting because it's like, does he respect her? Like, what is like what's going on with that? And you don't really
Yes.
find out in this book, at least.
Yes. I know. I thought that was really interesting, but I was like, she is up against this ultimate
Hmm.
baddie. And later, well, kind of throughout it too, we find what he did to end up,
Hmm.
on death row and then to end up there. Where like he was very bad. Like
Yeah.
he was not a good person. And then when he got changed into this
Yeah.
vampire super
He was
soldier
still not
thing, it just like amplified how
good. Uh-huh.
his inner demon, I guess.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think as far as the beginning goes, I will say like initially, not like again, I was pretty much sucked into because with the writing and the narrator, it was a really good audiobook. So I
Yes.
wasn't really mad or anything like that in the beginning, but I will definitely say like I was kind of like wondering, I'm like, this book is huge. Like, when are these storylines going to intersect? So like for
Yes.
a little while in the beginning, I was kind of like, oh, this is meandering. But
Yeah.
then like they wove in immediately, and then it was weird because then you ended up like, so in midpoint of the book, you completely divert from those characters
Yes.
because like it goes 100 years in the future. So like I kind of thought, because like how everything played out, I'm like, Amy's gonna have to come back in some capacity. But it was so strange because it just felt like you were ripped from their lives. It's like, well, you got to know them. Woo, goodbye.
I know. And then just like placed, because then it was like we didn't even go immediately right back to Amy. Like we met totally new people, totally new
Mhm.
characters, and like then we had to relearn their whole world, which was pretty crazy too. Like,
Mhm.
okay, all right, I know I'm 100 years in the future,
Yeah.
so now I have to adjust my mind, even though you just showed me like I'm completely mind boggled now because there were 12 vampires that just jumped out and
Mhm.
just attacked everybody, but
Yeah.
I did like the
The
fall
12.
of the world too. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like and then like how the president was like, oh, it was an attack or someone's trying to attack us and things like
Mhm.
that. It's like, oh no, honey, this was your military.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think like so later in the book when you're following the characters 100 years later, like they're always under the impression that it was like the military was trying to protect them, and like
Mhm.
so it's just it's also, I mean, that saying of like history is written by the victors,
Yeah.
or like in like a lot of dystopian novels, it's written by the people in charge. So if the people in charge not want you to know something, they're going to cover it up. So
Right.
it's just crazy that like without all of this like information, like how many people just believed it and kept moving on and thinking that there was going to be hope down the road.
Right. And like, because Peter and Alicia and all of them only lived in like their little bubble. I mean, they couldn't leave because there were virals everywhere, but like only in their little bubble, like, of course, like that's all they knew, because like that's what their grandparents were told, their parents were told, and the bedtime stories that they were told, like, oh, like, you know, like we'll be saved one day, they're going to come back for us, it might take a while. But the irony of it being like the military actually did that. It was an accident. They didn't mean for it to happen, but they had to have known the dangers of what would happen if these ultimate baddies got out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought that it was really cool too. Like, this is going back to when the virals were still caged, that how clever they were and how sneaky they were. Like, they were so smart that they knew they could home in on like the people who were supposed to be watching their monitors. Like Gray, we got a really good scoop on Gray. And how he was kind of able to get inside of his mind, which would show us like the telepathic abilities, and how he could trick them into like following him until like they were ready for those doors to be open. And so it was like they had to figure out how they were going to escape, and how they figured out to escape was to trick them and get inside their minds.
When I think too, like when you think about like real life, like I feel like that is like that would be realistic to me as well, because without vampiric abilities, right? If you have nothing to do and you're being tested and you're sitting there, like, I mean, yeah, of course I would be sitting there plotting and planning and watching and figuring out movements and observing, because eventually someone's going to slip up. Like, humans are humans. So it's almost like, you know, if I just watch and plan enough, like I will be able to get out of here. By that point too, they also have like these abilities now that also makes their escape so much easier.
And I thought it was weird too at the beginning, where when Gray was showing or talking about with the rabbits, where they would always eat the 9 but never eat the 10th one. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm sure that's going to circle back, and that's going to be a big part of and it was like that ended up being a big part as to like how they created their little many, or like the army. Army of virals, or the many, as Babcock called them.
Okay, so 2 questions I have following up on that. The first one I'll start with, because it's on the same topic, is, do you think the apocalyptic world was believable? And I'll expand too, because this is what I'm thinking of. So this book was written in 2010. And thinking of like the technology we had in 2010, sure, things have advanced, but we had quite a bit of technology in 2010. And then this book starts in 2012. So my like thought is, you know, and I don't know what it is about like apocalyptic, like anything, like books or shows, but everything shows like death and destruction, and all of our technology is just suddenly gone. Like, I don't remember, and this could just be me, but I don't remember anything specifically saying like this is why technology was destroyed. So like that's the only thing that I'm a little iffy on. And I know it's a trope, so like I'm trying not to be too harsh on it. But that's kind of like, did they do anything? Do the virals have any kind of like frequency? Because like they obviously do have, like, they still have lights, like they still have other things. But then they talk about how there hasn't been pictures in like hundreds of years. You know what I mean?
That's a good point. When they were like further down into the book, when they were looking at the pictures and how he'd never seen a picture of someone that he actually knew. That's a good point, because like they could still have like Polaroids.
These are Polaroids. They could still do old fashioned, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure like things like no one bombed the United States, so it's not like these things, because clearly they went into an abandoned house with everything still in it. So like it's not like things were just completely wiped out. The only thing that I feel like would be reasonable would be like, okay, yeah, we have less populations because you have a plague that is just killing people. And I could understand like cell phone towers being wonky, like if you're just losing people to man these and keep them up to date. But at the same time, like in my head, I would want to make, like, if I was going through an apocalypse, like I just think like, you know, not that I'm not a doomsday prepper, but like these things exist. So I don't know. It's just so interesting to me how like what is the reason in this book in particular that technology just doesn't exist anymore?
So I feel like with like radios, what I kind of picked up on, and this may not be true, but how I felt like I understood it was they weren't allowed to at least have like the radios, because I thought that was how the virals were able to communicate through, like because of the frequency.
It might be, yeah, and I might have missed that part.
Like because like you know how when Michael was in like the tower, when he was in the place with keeping the lights, and he ended up finding the radio, and it kept like every 90 minutes it would like do like a beep or something, because it was Amy and she was slowly getting closer to them.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I could think with like maybe radios, is everyone wasn't allowed to have radios because the virals could talk through them some way. But I bet that would be like, that's the only thing that I know like could potentially be. I did think it was weird about like the whole light situation too. Like 100 years later, they still have some type of power. But I do think that he did a good job with saying like, oh, the power will eventually run out.
Yeah.
But I do still think it's kind of weird, because I feel like they would still have like solar, like.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I mean, we have like all of this thing too. Like, we had cell phones in 2012.
Right.
Like, we have, and even in 2010 when this was written, we still had all of this technology. So, like, sure, like some of it I do think like if we lost too many people and things weren't being able to be like taken care of, then yeah, some things would go away. But I just had a hard time thinking everything.
Yeah, I would agree. Especially like you had an excellent point with like the pictures. Like you would think that at least like the little disposable cameras that cost nothing.
Yeah. But like I could get it too, like not being able to develop them or whatever. But like, but completely.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess maybe it'll explain it.
Maybe, but I was gonna say I feel like we probably missed the boat on that. However, goes to my next thing then. Because at the end of the book, right?
Yeah.
You get like, so because this is all in North America.
Yes.
Specifically the United States.
Yes.
So
kind of on the West Coast. Because they said East there was like, they weren't sure if there was anything.
Yeah, because this was in Colorado.
Yes.
So then we get to the end of the book, and at the very end, you get that glimmer of, oh, there's the other world, the rest of the world, which kind of like, I got really jazzed about that, because my biggest thing with the Hunger Games is one of my favorite book series of all times, but I always wondered what the hell the other, like, what was the rest of the world doing while Panem was here?
Yeah. It's almost like Suzanne Collins didn't know, so she was like, we just won't include that.
Yeah. That was the only thing I was bummed about, and the only thing I wanted in the prequel. That was my only complaint. But with this, at the very end of the book, you get like it's on a display that like, so people have gone into like the ruins of America to take back artifacts, and now they're, what was that, Australia, Geneva?
Yeah, Australia or something like that.
Yeah, I knew it was a weird name, but it's Geneva or something like that.
Yeah.
So like, I'm excited, and I'm wondering if now we're gonna get into that, because then that might be that it could explain what happened a little bit more in America and why everyone else in the world is thriving. Like, can the virals not swim? Are they?
So I kind of have read a little bit about book 2, and we do find out about everyone else, and I'm super excited, and so but it makes sense. Yeah, we do find out. So this isn't the Hunger Games for that. We do find out what happens to the rest of the world.
Good, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because the next book, like, a spoiler, but like the next book is called The 12, so like it's gonna be following the 12 vampires, like the original vampires, I'm sure, or at least having something to do with it. So I'm also wondering if the 12 like are gonna level up as well. So if we're going to get more of the rest of the world, but then we also follow these vampires who are like super vampires.
Oh yeah, they're like the ultimate baddies. But some of them are, and I think some of them aren't. Kind of like Carter, he wasn't really bad because he really didn't kill anybody. So I really liked him. I think he was probably one of my faves.
I know. Okay. Well, go ahead. You can tell me your thought now.
So another thing, this goes back to like about when we were talking about the technology, is I did think it was cool that they were using crossbows and knives. So it made sense with like, obviously they wouldn't have guns and weapons like that unless like what they found lying around, which they did find some of that in like the bunkers. But I would question how useful they would be, even if they've been sitting for 100 years. Like, I just think of anything that sits out in a box for 100 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it's metal. Like, it's definitely going to be rusted. It's probably not going to work as good as it's supposed to because no one's keeping up with the maintenance. So there were some things like when they were using guns here and there that I thought it kind of pushed it a little because I'm like, these are 100-year-old guns, guys. Like, I mean, I just think about when...
Well, because most guns, like, you need maintenance on them. I mean, you have to take care of them. And if you haven't used it in a while, like, you have to, like, clean it out. And there's a certain way to clean it.
Right. And
no, I totally
include
agree.
that in there. I did find it a little but I did like that he did use, like, crossbows and things like that to change...
More sense, absolutely.
Yeah, and then like how they were riding horses, like that made sense versus driving cars because like maintenance on a 100-year-old car. Let's just be real, like.
Oh yeah,
and like it made sense with the few like when they had like the Humvee and a couple of things like that, where that could kind of make sense because like I was assuming that they were military, so they were built more to last. But at one point further on in the story, when it died, Michael was just like, "Oh well. Sorry, guys."
That's
like,
it. Yeah. It's
so
funny too that when I was reading this book, like I literally, like, I don't know, like 2 weeks, right before I started reading it, I want to say, I was like randomly like, whatever happened to Hummers and Humvees and like that was such a big thing in like the 2000s. And then I'm like laughing and I'm like, this is a 2010 book.
Yep, it is for sure.
But side note.
Yeah, right. There's something else I wanted to say. We were talking about Humvees. I can't remember. It'll come to me. Anyways, we can move forward.
Okay. So, what do you think about representation in the book? General diversity.
I liked it. I feel like he did a good job with different, like, not just keeping the cast one particular kind of person or I do feel like he did a good job with that, and how like it wasn't really like seen as something as an issue, like how it kind of is now. Yeah. So I'm trying to think.
Well, because I'm pretty sure. I mean, for the most part, I think most of the main cast is predominantly white.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I was kind of like about is I do think a lot of the people of color were very stereotyped.
Okay.
So you have like the kind of like the dumb black man who gets arrested and doesn't know anything. You know what I mean? You have the woman of color who's like the caretaker role, Lacey.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Huh.
Like and then you have like the now I can't remember.
Lawrence Gray?
No, the old lady who was like, she was a kid who was like one of the younglings that were taken.
Auntie?
Auntie, yes. So Auntie is again same thing. Like I just imagine her as the big bosom black woman who's like, come here, I'll make you tea. Like, let's sit and let me tell you stories.
I didn't think of that.
So while I didn't hate them, I did just think like I could just tell again this was a product of 2010.
Yeah.
Where like diversity was not a big push. And then I have not watched the show. I may now watch the show and then maybe do one of my book versus adaptations on it.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think that's probably also why they ended up changing the young girl, because the young girl, Amy, is black in the show.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they probably tried to diversify it a little bit. But there was a couple like random comments early on in the book that I was kind of like, do we need these? Because there was one about like, he made just a random comment about like, and I was trying to like figure out if it was like supposed to be a comment on the character that like the perspective we were in.
Yeah.
or if it was necessary, because like nothing else kind of portrayed these characters as racist. But then they would come off with well, where are all the Mexicans at? Probably in the Home Depot parking lot. Like, bruh.
Right.
Come on.
I must have skipped right over that. But yeah, there were a few things. Like there was like I'm not a big like language type person, but there was some heavy language in the book, and I felt I needed to note that too because I had forgotten.
Yeah.
But I did find it funny further on. Sorry, not going down a rabbit hole. But when they would say flyers, like I kind of thought that was funny. But yeah, there was like the language, and then like how we were talking about that. There was like a few things where I was like, that's probably not necessary because that is a little tedious.
Yeah. And I think like those parts, it was more of like the characters. Like if you can make it believable for me, but like when you just have one-off lines and it's like I don't think we needed that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the other reason probably why I'd give it a 4.5, just because like some of those, like I said, it's just unnecessary, but like we apparently didn't have any moral qualms with it back in 2010.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I guess it wasn't a huge issue because it was never really surfaced, or at least I haven't read anything about.
I think social media does play a big role into a lot of issues anymore. And like 2010, I got my Facebook in 2010. Like, right. So, like, you know what I mean? So like, it was just really becoming a thing of like, you can communicate all the time. Now, granted, I know Facebook was around before 2010, but I never had it. I had Tumblr. That was the only thing I had up until, a
MySpace.
I had a MySpace. I did have a MySpace, yes. I had MySpace up until 2010, and then I converted. But yeah, you know what I mean? So like, I do think this might have gotten called out, but at the same time, I give them props because it wasn't like so much. It wasn't shoved down your throat. It wasn't like overwhelming. It was just a few lines here and there. And again, it's an 800-page book, so do I excuse it? No, but I do think we've come a long way in books, industry.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see how it is in the other two books, to see how it's presented.
Me too, because I think he published those bad boys pretty quickly.
I think he did. I have it pulled up. So he published this one in 2010. The 12 was also 2012.
Yeah.
And then 2016 was The City of Mirrors.
Yeah. So like all relatively quick.
Yeah.
George R.R. Martin was still waiting 11 years for the next Game of Thrones book, but this guy,
he needs a little sprinkle of what Justin Cronin's got.
Yeah.
Well, it's like one of the, it's totally off topic, but since we're talking about that, one of my favorite authors when I was younger, she's not very popular, and I actually just forgot her name, Carla Culver, something like that. She's only written 5 books, but she was supposed to write 2 trilogies. Well, she wrote her first trilogy when she was like 14 to 17 years old, and then she has the first 2 books of her other trilogy, but she published the second book back in like 2015, but it's like advertised as a trilogy, and I'm like, are we gonna get that third book, or is it just gonna be a duology and I'm never gonna know the end?
It's probably, honestly, it was probably one of those things where like she got dropped by the publisher and they weren't able to.
And I think too, just another brief moment, but I think she got into modeling, and I think she lives in New York and she's a model, so I think she's kind of not really into the writing thing anymore.
Yeah. I'm sorry, my dog is just farting.
Oh my god!
I hear this little pat. I'm like, what are you doing?
Oh my gosh, Aria.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah. So otherwise, though, like it's one of those things, and I know this is such a hot topic, so I don't want to dwell on it too. But like, I don't necessarily think the plot itself faltered due to lack of diversity. I also I didn't have any really images. He might have actually described people. I know someone had red hair. I think it was Alicia had red hair. Yeah. So I know she had red hair, and I don't really remember the descriptions. I know that Amy had dark hair.
Yeah, and that confused me because I thought, but I mean, she's also getting older. But I thought when she was little, I thought she was a little blonde. But she was also 6, so her hair color could have changed. But
yeah, you were right.
Because I got confused because I was like, I thought she was blonde, and then now it was like, oh, now she has black hair. But she could have gotten older.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it could have just been the author made a typo. He couldn't remember what he had his character as 800 pages later.
Right?
Yeah.
But that was what I had thought. But I know, too, so I'm trying to think. I feel like Peter and Theo, weren't they? I thought that they were biracial.
They might have been. Like I say, I have a hard time.
But
I'm having a hard time remembering all of them. Like I said, I do know that Auntie was black. I know Carter.
Yeah.
So like, those are the main ones I remember.
And then there was Mausami, and then Sunjay, her father, too. And
so I guess I think we probably had more in the end, which is good. Like the first half of the book, we didn't have as much. But then when we got to the group, which makes sense also because then you're going to have clusters of people who just need to survive together.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. I think so. I think in the beginning, maybe not so much, but later on, I think he did good with kind of combining and, getting everybody in there. Trying to.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question then is, did it age well? It's 11 years later. How good do you think this book has aged so far, and how well do you think it'll stay moving forward?
I think it'll be a classic one day. The only thing that might keep it from maybe moving forward, like in 30 years or something, is how bulky it is.
But then we have The Historian, which is a vampire novel, and that's 900 pages. So
yeah, right. And so I feel like I'm just thinking, like, if anyone is ever gonna like learn about this in like school or something, just to get, like the thriller, horror, whatever, apocalyptic feel, I feel like maybe snippets of it.
Yeah.
Because it, to me, is very unique in the fact that we see how it starts, and then we do like the whole jumping 100 years in the future, which to me seems pretty rare with stories, where either is before it happens or it's
way after.
Yeah. You never really get both in the same kind of book. So I feel like 10 years later, I was able to thoroughly enjoy it. I would be interested. I probably won't ever reread it just because it's so long.
I would agree.
I loved it. Oh, sorry.
No. I was gonna say, like, I agree. Like, I don't know. It's so hard because I do think there's a lot of like you said, I think that's the best like element of this is that you see the before, during, kind of a little bit, and after of like all of it. And it is kind of refreshing to go through all of that. I think the size, not that it's, because there's definitely like Count of Monte Cristo, I think is like Les Miserables, like there's all classics that are huge as well. So I don't think that's necessarily deterrent, but I do think part of it that might be like a dark spot is their failed TV show, because unfortunately I think this is a book that I just don't think can be adapted well.
Agreed.
Like, unfortunately, what was it on CBS? Like, I'm sorry, but cable networks are failing miserably. And this is true. Like, they're not holding a candle to like Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu, who are really putting out quality shows anymore. So you put this huge book. I mean, even HBO, like Game of Thrones, massive series. We're not going to talk about the last 2 seasons, but like took a book and really understood how to adapt it so well. Same thing with Shadow and Bone recently. Took the novels, obviously had to make some creative tweaks to make it work, but it was a successful adaptation. So I just feel like this book on a cable network, it was never going to work.
Right. And I just think it's because there's so much jumping here and there. And it would be like, to me, it would be hard to follow if it was anything other than a book, because well, I don't know if I would be able to stick with it if I even had to like read the hard copy. Because like the audiobook like you said, it was almost 40 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just book one. So
Yeah.
that's an excellent point, where I think if anyone would ever be like, oh, well, I heard that this was a trilogy, let's watch the TV show.
Yeah, I think it's going to turn off a lot of people, because I haven't watched it, but I know it failed. Like, it did not get any buzz. And this was a huge book when it came out. Like, a lot of people were praising it. It was on book lists like crazy. So the fact that they waited 10 years to make a show of this, and then they did it terribly.
Yeah. And like,
it's sad.
For sure. And I feel like sometimes, like, that's how books are. Like, they're designed just to be books. Like, or you can get, like how you said, someone that's very, very creative and do like creative tweaks to it and make it successful. But this is so much different from like the Lord of the Rings. Like, how there's a story to follow, where like, even though there is a story to follow, it's told in a different way.
Well, yeah, that's like a huge problem, because like, even like looking at it like from a person who I would love to write like TV shows one day. Like, that'd be so fun. Right. But like, I don't have any experience, but looking at it, like, to do just a season of like lead up to the, like, I mean, I keep calling it D-Day, but you know what I mean? Like, to the viral day, right? I mean, that could be definitely very interesting, and you can get all these perspectives, but it's not the full book. And I don't know how the TV show tried to tackle this, but like, I don't think it would be like, I think it would be very smart to break this into like this one book into 3 seasons.
Yes, because you have all the different parts too. Like, you have the part 1 to like part 11, where it's like, even just like those parts could be a season.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, there's just so much impact, and it's just kind of sad. Like, some books just don't make good adaptations.
And that's fine.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's why like there's books, because sometimes you can't relate it. Yeah. And I also feel like it was too late. Like, I think if they, before the last book was published, if they were able to greenlight this, they might have been able to like keep the hype going. But
yeah, I agree. I agree. And I would be curious to know Justin Cronin's, like, his personal opinions. I mean, we'll never know, because he probably isn't allowed to share his personal opinions.
Maybe. I don't know if I didn't even think about like looking up like if there was an interview.
Yeah, like, I'd be curious to see how he would feel, or how he felt about it, because I think he was on set. I think I did read that he was present when the series was being made, but I don't know how much of a say-so he had.
I just saw like a thing about that he, after like writing The Passage, he no longer writes short fiction.
Oh, so he must have really enjoyed.
Yeah. Oh my God. This successful trilogy that clocks in over 900,000 words. So just to give you guys an idea, it is gigantic.
It's a Milwordy, basically.
Seriously, it really is.
Oh my God.
1,500 pages, enough for 9 novels. Crazy.
That is, wow. That's impressive.
Okay. Yeah, so he definitely, so I think he means like actually like short stories, like legit short stories. Like, not like a novel, like a short story.
Yeah. That's funny.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, that was my little side. It is super
I like
crazy. That. That's a lot of writing.
For sure.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're coming. We have like 15 minutes left of our show.
We should have done 2 hours, since it's a huge book.
I know. But this is the point, is just to get our thoughts out. So, any other parts that you want to talk about, or any questions that you have?
I should have wrote some stuff down, because I knew like when it was happening, I was like, oh, I really want to talk about this and this.
I made notes. I'm like, I'm gonna forget everything.
See, and I was going to make notes, but I was like, I was that kid in school. And I'm not in school anymore. I don't want to make these notes. But I was like, I have it pulled up over here, and I'm like, if I could at least just like look at the novel, I might be able to remember certain things. So I do want to talk about too, like, her, like Amy's telepathic abilities, where I thought that it was cool like the many and like the people who were turned by Babcock, like they were obviously like they were his, so they answered to him. But I do think that it was cool too, like even though that they were virals, they kind of had like a sense of what they were doing, but it was like they couldn't stop themselves. But then they would go to Amy to be like, who am I? Like,
yeah.
like,
Oh my God. Yeah. That scene of like, I'm just going to like name all of you.
oh my gosh. Oh yeah. That was totally overdone. Because
yeah, I was like, can we not name all these people? And at that point, I'm on 2x speed trying to power through. And I'm like, I don't need to know all their names there.
That was pretty funny, I will say, especially like listening to the audiobook, because it was like a good 2 minutes. And I'm like, how many people were there? Like, and then it was like after, a minute and a half, I'm like, all right, I get it. There were a lot of virals.
That's not meandering.
yeah. So, but I think one of the parts that probably freaked me out about that was when we were kind of getting Amy's background, and she had fled and she was like sleeping in the barn, and she woke up and there were some virals around her, and they were like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? That part, listening to that actually kind of freaked me out.
Yep, that definitely freaked me out too.
Yeah, because I was like, oh my God. And then she like ran out the barn, and I was like, but she was only like, 100 and something, maybe 90, but like she's just like a 10-year-old kid still.
Yeah.
And she's got all these people coming to her about like, who am I? But it's like, I thought that was cool.
It was a really good, it was a very like, especially to listen to, it was a really good scene executed well for the audiobook.
Yeah, for sure. And I did like to, this goes to Michael, where I did want to say that I really liked him, and I love that they called him Circuit, and then when they got to the military, they called him Lugnut. Like, that was just really funny.
Yeah.
But I did kind of like the humor that was spread out throughout it. And then I was going to say something about Michael, but like how he pretty much figured out like Amy was like that beacon that he was seeing travel. Like, he was very intelligent.
Yeah.
And I feel like that he did, like, Justin Cronin did that very well too. Like
he earned his intelligence.
Yes. Yes. And also I feel like through the whole novel, and me and you had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, not this particular novel, but about writing in general, where, you know how sometimes we don't like to give away exactly what it is. So we like kind of like pique the interest.
Like little breadcrumbs. Yeah.
Yes. And then like some people can execute it really well. And then sometimes it ends up turning into like info dumping. I feel like Justin Cronin did a really good job with, like, he would kind of spike that interest and you're like, ooh, like, what is that? And then a couple of chapters later, he would like present it to you. So I feel like he did really good with keeping the information like alive and current.
Yeah.
Where like I didn't ever feel like I want to know like what this is. Am I gonna have to read another 500 pages to find out exactly what this was?
Yeah. No, I totally agree, because there was never a point in when I like listening to the book where I was like, oh my God, like what, like just give me the answer.
Right. Yeah. There was, it was like perfectly spaced out too, where like some people do it like too early, where like they'll tell you like that secret, that little thing, and then on the next page it's like revealed to everyone. And or the opposite, where it's revealed 300 pages later. So I feel like he did an excellent job with that. And I feel like that kept the interest too, because it was such a beefy book where it could just be overwhelming. I think he did that very well, where it kept you going.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely like, I was fine. Like, I mean, more of it was just my personal time. Like, I was trying to like get through to read it. And honestly, like, I was kind of in a book slump because I was like trying to focus on other things in my own life. But like every time I picked it up, I was like back into it. Like, so definitely like it really didn't lag at all. And it wasn't a book where like if I put it down for a day or two, I would be like, oh, I gotta read it again. I was kind of like, okay, what's next?
Agreed. Yeah. And I feel like when I would go on like a couple of days where I didn't have a chance to read it, I almost would get antsy because I'm like, I really want to read it because I want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
And like, that's what I really loved about the audiobook too. And like you had said too, like the narrator was phenomenal. He did an excellent job. Also, how did you feel about Lacey at the beginning when she was shot, and then she basically sacrificed herself to save Walgast and Amy, and then later on when she's the angel on the mountain, how did you feel? Like, how did you feel, or did you think that was going to happen?
I definitely did not think it was going to happen. Like, honestly, like, I feel bad, like, R.I.P. Lacey, but I thought she was dead and gone. Like, I didn't think she was coming back. So, like, I feel like maybe I should have thought of it, but, like, I really thought, I'm like, I should have known, because it was the testing facility, that, like, there could have been a possibility, because this is a fantasy book.
Right.
But, I mean, he's definitely, especially towards the end, like, he had no qualms killing off people. Like, even, like, you know, his, like, mom, like, her mother, like, Amy's mother was obviously, like, she killed a man, and then, like, she was gonna get killed herself. So, like, people were dying throughout it and not coming back. So I just was like, yeah, we're here.
And Caleb, how did you feel about Caleb's death?
Yeah, it made me sad.
I was gonna say it made me sad, but he was like one of those like characters like on the side where like I knew someone was gonna get sliced off, and I was just waiting to see who it was.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm gonna be totally honest, my saddest death was the damn dog.
Oh my!
Like, why did you have to put that in there?
No, I know. I knew too. I knew. I was like, there's gonna be something not right about this dog, and I don't like this. But I really loved, I was gonna say, I really loved Malsami, considering she was pregnant and she was doing all of this. But how did you feel about her pregnancy in the story? Like, do you feel like it did anything to the plot, or do you feel like if she wasn't pregnant, if it would have changed anything?
I mean, I feel like there was that extra layer of realness with, like, the whole plot itself, because, like, it's, oh my god, I have another thing to talk about too that I just remembered. But okay, so, like, I do feel like she was a good female character, and because, like, humans are humans, and we have urges and we have needs, and it makes sense to fall in love and want this stuff, even though, like, maybe it's not smart. Like, I do think it was realistic, like, that this would happen, that, like, you know, it would add an extra layer of difficulty for them as well. So, like, I really wasn't mad. I feel like I didn't need all the details about the birth itself.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, and then in my head too, because I'm like, I am not a doctor and I've never had a child, but I'm like, how do you know this much information? That's literally because Masami's like, this is what you gotta do. And I'm like, girl, how do you know that? I wouldn't know what I'm doing. I would be like, shit. Right. Oh, so, and also, God.
Yeah. Oh no, you're fine. This is like totally changing gears even though I just asked you this question. But what about the Haven?
Okay, which one was the Haven again?
That was the one with
like the people that I thought were hillbillies at first, with all the men and the creepy people. That one
with the two men and like all the women and the babies.
Yes, that's what I was just gonna say. That's what I was because it's actually that ties right into what I was gonna say.
Okay.
What is it with these weird like ideas of women in this novel? Like because the women were like being like the Haven had like them churning out babies for like sacrifices.
Yeah,
so they were kind of like I'm like they're kind of just like like women. Like let's just how many babies can you pop out to keep us safe? And then you had the weird military people as well. Who were like women? Oh my god! Like,
yeah,
they were a little creepy. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, they're like, in a way, it was like super objectifying. And I'm like, why is no one women? Are you? It was very insulting. I'm like, do you think us that incapable?
Yeah, that was pretty insulting, especially with like Alicia. Like, Alicia's a badass. Can we just be real? Like, she's probably my favorite character, along with Malsami. I mean, I feel like Malsami would have been there if she hadn't been pregnant. Not like that's a disability, but, I mean, she's 6 months pregnant. I mean, she can't,
we got priorities.
Right. And so, and I think that also was a good reason, going back to why she was pregnant. Sorry, jumping all over the place. But with Malsami also being pregnant, where it made sense for her and Theo to stay behind and the rest continue to kind of, chisel away some of the characters. So then you got like the core group. But the Haven was really weird. And one thing, and I guess it was just to show like what happened, but then there was like one of the girls that was in the Haven, but she was one of the girls that was from their group a long time ago, but she ended up, I guess, getting captured, and then I can't remember her name. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And like I thought there was going to be more that came out of that, but there wasn't really. But I guess it was just to show us like that they were, kidnapping women and keeping them alive so they could give birth or sacrifices to Babcock and like the many. Yeah. But I kind of wished that character maybe would have joined the group, and we would have gotten maybe her inside scoop as to like what was happening in the Haven.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it definitely was creepy, and I do think like it was very cult-like.
Yes.
And yeah, so like, and that's why I was kind of thinking. I'm like thinking of like this creepy hillbilly cult where like they're breeding their women, and like that's all they're good for. So like, do you ever see? I don't know why, but like the original Black Christmas, which is like real messed up. Don't watch it.
Okay.
Real messed up. But like it reminded me of that kind of like crap where like, cause I was literally thinking like they were, cause he had no qualms like dropping like taboo topics like that. He like named a pedophile. Like this is a pedophile character and you're following a pedophile and like you're following a murderer. You know what I mean? Like early on with the test subjects. So I literally was expecting them to be like rapists and incest stuff going on. Like that was the vibes I was getting.
Yeah. And then go ahead. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, and then I was just gonna say, and then they had the daughter that was like 16, like assaulting Michael. And he's like, no, this is fine. I'm like, sir, priorities.
I thought that was weird too, because Michael was just kind of like,
it's my fault. Like, I'm like, sir, you were assaulted.
Right. I know. Like that was strange, but I guess that was to show us like how
desperate they were.
Yeah. They were very messed up, but they were also, but that was how they were surviving. So
yeah. And I mean, granted, it's like I said, I'm not gonna like complain as far as like, you could make your plot whatever. It was a little weird and uncomfortable, but I think like what got me is just that you had this group of people, and then you had like these like macho men like who've never seen a woman before, and I'm like, where are all the women at?
Yeah.
Like not there. Yeah, sure. People would die. I mean, my husband always tells me that I would die in an apocalypse because I don't pay attention to things. But I know there's other people that would protect me.
Right. And then like
that might be women.
Exactly. And that's a good point too, where like when he kind of explained like, oh, like they took an oath like that they're gonna fight until they die. But I guess they didn't want like other women around because they didn't want them to like fall in love.
Yeah, to be a distraction.
But distraction.
But like, what about the gays?
Well, that was my thing, and I was like, but what if there are perfectly good women that are soldiers?
And that too, yeah. I mean, you're not gonna sit here and tell me that men with sexual needs are not gonna hook up with each other after so many years. Like, there's no way.
Especially after they took this oath. Like, they're like, I'm gonna die anyways, so like, what does it matter?
Yeah.
And like, but then and this is actually a good point. But like on this topic, but I also didn't like this one part didn't make sense because like after all of that and saying that they have to hide in their cave, like in the tents, and they're not allowed to come out, and then all of a sudden Alicia pulls out, I'm from the last expeditionary and the colonel and blah blah blah, I swore my oath, and then he was just like, oh, okay, well, you swore your oath, come on. Like that didn't really make sense to me. Where it was like, you just spent 6 pages explaining why women aren't with you guys, but then we're gonna shave her head and make her look like a man, so now everyone's urges are gonna stop. Like that was like, that's an excellent
also
point.
Too, if you're like, okay, again, and like this is grim, but like I'm gonna be realistic too. Like if you say we have like the straight men who have not converted, and you see women, like you're also gonna tell me that none of them are gonna try to do something. And I know they implied that kind of, which is why like they were like stay in the tent. but like, why would that go away with Alicia?
Right. I mean, now she's like by herself. Like, I mean, if it was her and Sarah and Amy out there, I mean, it's 3 of them versus 1. They might stand some kind of chance if something were to happen, but then you just isolated her. And then, like, how
left her alone with apparently men who are dangerous.
Right. Well, and then it's like, I mean, we talk about like the shortage of like humans. Like, there's not many of us left. And that group of military people were supposedly part of another group that like we meet later on. But then it's like, well, obviously there has to be women and children, but why are you only taking your men if there's only such a shortage? Yeah. Like, wouldn't you want any able body and like all hands on deck to help fight this war?
Yeah. Also, the other thing is too, I mean, sacrifice is well and noble, but like if you have something to live for, I personally feel like that's a stronger motivator to do your job and do it well than like YOLO.
right. Like kamikaze it. Like, yeah, so much.
Yeah. So like, that line of thinking, did not make sense to me. And I definitely think it kind of like, it made me roll my eyes a few times where I'm like, this makes no sense.
I agree. I think like, no, it would have made sense if they would have been like, oh yeah, like they're here to fight for like their wives and their children. Cause then like you said, it gives them something to fight for. It gives them something to come home to. Like, I mean, cause like, I mean, think about the soldiers who go off to war nowadays. Like they go in,
they
wanting to protect, right. And wanting to come home. So they're going to still fight the best that they possibly can and do their jobs to the best of their abilities. But it's survival. It's basic survival where they want to come home. Like they don't want to die on the battlefield. So that's one thing that.
Yeah. And again, going back to like the diversity that I was talking about earlier, like he literally completely erased the possibility of gay people, like just completely and utterly. And again, I know that like I could see someone who like, for instance, if you like are 2 women who only love women, but are like the population might like need us. Like, you know, you would make sacrifices, but you can't tell me that there are no more lesbians, that there are no more gays, that there are no more like asexuals, that there are no more bisexuals. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's so like the fact that you're just saying like the sector of man is like there's no women around. Like, come on, brah.
Yeah, like it's very narrow-minded, and but it is also like we said 2010, so it wasn't really a heavy topic. But
and I don't know his background either. I mean, because it could be like, you know, something to do with religion or his own beliefs, which that could obviously play a factor too. But it just seemed like if you're gonna make a true apocalyptic, like you that's gonna be a part of life. Like this is real life.
Right. So. It's not like it's a fantasy. I mean, it is a fantasy world, but you know what I mean? It's not like they're in a different realm or something like that. Like it's our world just destroyed.
Yeah. And gay people were out of the closet in 2010. I'm sorry.
Yes. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. But all right. So since we are around the hour mark, I'm going to end with what did you think about the ending and any thoughts for book 2?
So I don't feel like Babcock is really dead. That's just my thing because it seems too easy.
I agree.
And just reading snippets of like the next 2 books, I can't see how it's possible. But I love Lacey's sacrifice. I did like the Project Noah and how they kind of incorporate it with the Bible, which could be his Christian beliefs. I did like that.
Yep.
I do like how it ended with talking about the Roswell massacre because that piques our interest because shots fired, I'll go check it out, and then it's the end. So I'm very
especially because they were in the book ends with our main characters now in Roswell, and the last bit, like almost like an epilogue, is a document from Sarah, one of the main characters, saying how like she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And then the Roswell massacre. So like now we're like, were they alive? Were they in the massacre?
Right. And then right. And with that, I feel like too that everything they've gone through and they worked so hard to get to Roswell and they thought that they were safe. Like they thought, oh, you know, no more virals, no more death, destruction. We're gonna be able to build a life here because like that was what Hollis wanted for him and Sarah. Like they worked so hard to get there, and then it's like they were there just for a short while, and now there's a massacre, some type of massacre. Something happened. Either people turned on people, virals were, you know, infiltrated. So I'm curious to see.
Or was it the rest of the world? Like, did the world finally like come through? Because then at the very, very end, it's 1,000 years after the AV, which I'm assuming is like the day of like the virals like were born or came into the world.
That's what I was thinking.
So if that's the case, then we're going 900 years in the future.
Right. That's a long behind time.
Yeah, which is a lot to. So I'm going to be curious about how that, if that's the case, like if it is actually 900 years, because like I said, I think it was 1003 AV or something like that.
Yeah.
So like if we are going that far in the future, unless AV means something else, and it's like, you know what I mean, it's earlier than that too, but that's a lot of time. And since I already feel like your weird technology issues with America. How are you going to handle technology with the rest of the world?
It's going to be cavemen now.
Yeah. Because clearly, yeah, granted, America has like, you know, like we're a first world country. So like, yeah, like they do have technological advances, but like we're not the only country. So like if you're going to tell me that other people do not have technology, like, no, I'm throwing the book.
Right, for sure. But how about you? How did you feel about the ending? Was it kind of like what you expected? How do you think it's going to play into book 2?
Yeah, I mean, I did like the ending. I was kind of, I thought more people might actually die because I thought they were going to head into a massacre.
Yeah.
So I was, especially because too, like this, I just felt like these books are almost like standalones. Like that's what I was thinking was going to happen, is like we're going to complete this story and then we're going to move to the next one. So like they do leave it a little bit open-ended where like we might not have these characters at all, but we might have references to them. So like, yeah, so I'm curious. I do think that, well, obviously the next book is called The 12. So like, I think we're going to get more of those vampires and like their stories, which I'm excited for.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I think we kind of know that we're going to have more of the world, which is what I would like.
Yeah.
I'm going to be curious about Amy.
I know.
What the rest of her world is. Because obviously I think like she's been the main like star of this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be interested. Like, is she going to be kind of like a young woman now in this next book?
I know. I can't wait for her to slowly start getting older. And then like, oh, and I know we're leaving, but I do want to say too, with Amy, how like at first she did, like when she was little, she didn't really talk a whole lot. And then like when it's 100 years later and she's with Peter and all of them, she doesn't really talk a whole lot at first either. But how then when she finally does start to talk, she's like, oh, like it's been so long pretty much since I've talked to anyone, I basically forgot how to talk because like she only ever listens to people talk in her head. Yeah. She never really has physical conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. So I also wonder, like maybe a prediction, but I don't know. Like, I don't want to like wish too much because I don't like when people are too overpowered, but I am wondering if Amy's going to like level up in some way. Mm-hmm. And then Babcock's going to come back. So I'm wondering if we're going to see a new strain or like more advances in the next book too. Because I do feel like we obviously like the virals have like they all kind of have different things. Like some of them are just like zombie-like where others have abilities. And then Babcock and Amy are like the OGs over here who have like these crazy abilities. So I feel like we might see something more progressive with that.
Yeah. And I think definitely we'll swing back to these characters because like at the end of book 1, they were pretty much like, oh, well, what if we set out to kill like the head honchos of all of them, like the 12. So
yeah, because they were kind of saying that like the queen bee, like you kill the queen, the rest of the hive is going to falter. So we kill the 12, we're going to save the world.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then I liked how Lacey was saved with Amy's blood. So I did like that. And then how like she slowly, she didn't age, or she slowly aged. And then I kind of knew that they were going to use it to save Alicia. But I'm interested to see, like, because there were 12. vials.
Yeah.
So I almost raised the question, were all 12 of them Amy's blood? Or was it a vial from each?
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Like, yeah, of the 12. I mean, now they're gone. But which one was she injected with?
Yeah, true. I also am wondering too, like, because Alicia didn't actually say, like, they kind of left it. They was fade to black, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, she's not gonna die. Like, they're gonna bring her back. So I'm wondering if if she is gonna come back, like what her transformation is, because I just don't think, like, they're also attached to her. Like, I cannot see them like taking a bullet or a pickaxe or whatever they had and actually killing her, because if I'm correct, they left him alone to do it. So it was only him in the room when he was supposed to kill her.
Yes. And then she ended up like waking up, but she just asked him to close the window because it was like too bright for her. But but one thing that makes me feel like it might not be exactly like how Amy is because Alicia has like the ability, like she like jumped and like did like a barrel roll, which is like how like the virals jump and get around.
Yeah.
But Amy doesn't do that. But then Alicia was also saying that she can't hear telepathic other people talk. But Amy could, and so could Lacey. So I thought that was interesting, where like Lacey was given Amy's blood and they shared similar abilities, where supposedly Alicia was given Amy's blood, but Alicia can jump, barrel roll, do kind of superhuman things,
but not everything.
Yeah. So I
was gonna say, I feel like there's two paths possibly. Is either it wasn't Amy's blood, or she's going to form other abilities, and that's going to lead to like a new wave of these virals.
Yeah, that's a really good. I like that.
But all right. Well, I mean, I feel like this is going to be the end of our show, because we pretty much made through everything that I think we wanted to touch upon anyway. But if anyone is watching this in the past, if you guys, or in the future, I mean, if you're watching this in the future and you have any thoughts on the passage, definitely leave me a comment and we will try to respond. And I know technically this is my channel, but I will just text Autumn if you have a specific question for either of us, and be like, I could say, Autumn, check out this comment. It's for you. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much. If anyone popped in, I know we only had one comment. I know I'm a smaller, both of us are pretty small channels. And also this is not a common book to do a book club over, but I'm happy to do it. So if you are stumbling upon this in the future, like and subscribe to both of us. Autumn's information is down below. And also, we will be doing the second book live show. So we are doing this every third like section of the year. So this one's the first one in April. The next one we're going to be doing in August. So you guys have 4 months to read and catch up if you want to join us. And hopefully by that point, we'll have our next book and our next live stream. And that is going to be over on Autumn's channel. And we'll post it when we get our schedules and know exactly when we're going to talk about it. But expect the end of August.
Yeah, for sure. Not the beginning. That's when we start reading.
Yeah. But otherwise, thank you so much. And thank you, Autumn, for reading this and talking with me. And this was so much fun. I am glad we picked a book that we both liked.
For sure. Absolutely.
All right. But then anyway, guys, thanks so much. And until next time, and hopefully you stick around, but otherwise we'll see you in August.
Yeah.
So, bye.